Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're talking about the OnePlus 8 reveal and what I think was the first ever virtual smartphone reveal announcement. Immediately after OnePlus's livestream event, I looked around on YouTube and saw that some of the larger channels already had videos up with the actual phone. But for the life of me, whenever I tried looking around, I still couldn't find my demo model. I really need to make sure that OnePlus has my right address. But you know what? I guess we'll just have to do with some mediocre editing of the reveal event as well as the power of imagination. But anyway, let's get into it. So the event itself was actually pretty interesting because normally this event would take place in front of thousands of eager analysts, influencers, and journalists, but given recent events with COVID-19, it all had to be done in isolation. And you know what? I think it went off pretty well, aside from a few awkward silences here and there, but I do think they did the best with what they had. Getting to the phones, in similar OnePlus fashion, the event was announcing two phones, the OnePlus 8 and the OnePlus 8 Pro. This video will cover the Pro version, and I'm not really sure if I want to do one on the normal version just yet. The OnePlus brand has been quietly creeping up in popularity, and while it's still miles away from the Apples and Samsungs of the world, they have become crowd favorites and even being nicknamed flagship killers because they provided flagship level performance or close to flagship level performance, whereas they were still relatively affordable. But the question is now, how large can an upstart company grow before they become the very thing they were seeking to defeat? Similar to the Samsung Ultra video I released earlier in the week, I'll be going through the phone in the four main areas, those being the design and display, the hardware, the camera, and the wow factor, which is kind of like what is the OnePlus way. So starting off with the design and display, while not much has drastically changed in the 8 Pro compared to the 7 Pro, I have to admit that the phone is visually stunning in my opinion, and that's primarily due to the colors available. This year you can get the Pro in Onyx Black, Ultramarine Blue, and Glacial Green, which does actually seem to be the color for Frozen Glacier, which is pretty cool to me, but my favorite does have to be the Ultramarine Blue. While there is no crazy form factor change of folding phones here, there's some minor changes that are seen. Looking at the specs, we see that the screen size increased from a 6.67 inch screen in the 7 Pro, increased to a 6.78 inch screen in the 8 Pro, and this is because they managed to shrink the bezels just a bit to squeeze some extra screen in there, and it is slightly noticeable. The resolution has not changed much, it's still a Quad HD with a 3168 by 1440p, and there was no problem with this resolution as it seemed to be the maximum of where phones are capping out these days, as we've seen the same in Samsung's flagship phones, which in my opinion set the standard for the best display. So it looks like the display hasn't really changed too much in the OnePlus 8, but one thing that is majorly different is that the 8 now has a 120Hz refresh rate, up from the 90 seen in the 7 Pro. Now, refresh rates have been something that have not been the most noticeable to me in the past, but after using Samsung's S20 with the 120Hz refresh rate for a couple of weeks, I dare say I won't be able to go back to a regular phone with 60Hz. Anyway, this is a major plus and a move in the right direction. This leaves the OnePlus 8 with a bright, crisp display, and it's even been awarded with the highest rating of A+ by DisplayMate as a result. So with the OnePlus touting a much more power-intensive display, let's take a look at what kind of hardware they're running. So they have a Qualcomm Snapdragon 865, which is the latest processor out there from Qualcomm, and the same one in the Samsung S20 Ultra, which currently has the best single and multi-core Geekbench scores for Android, so it has to be pretty comparable to that. They have 8 or 12GB options for RAM, which is pretty good when you consider that 5 years ago, both would have been considered crazy to have in a phone. One complaint about the 7 Pro was that the battery could be improved upon, and this is mostly due to the 90Hz refresh rate that was killing the battery. So now they have bumped up the battery from a 4000 mAh battery to a 4500 mAh, which is needed when you consider that there's higher RAM, a higher refresh rate, a faster processor, as well as the standard 5G antenna that will be included in all phones. While this isn't the craziest battery out there, or the largest by any means, one of the best things about the OnePlus battery is not how long they last, but how quickly they charge with their warp drive charging, which can get the phone to 0 to 60 in just under half an hour. Now, this does mean that you need to be in an outlet for it to charge that fast, but most of us normally are when you consider that we're at work or something like that, and the actual efficiency of the battery hasn't been shown yet, but based on Marques Brownlee's video, it does seem to last at least a day and can work as a daily driver, but if you do use it intensively, you can definitely kill it in one day, especially if you use the max resolution and refresh rate. Lastly, the phone itself is finally IP68 certified, which means that I don't have to worry if I mistakenly drop it in the pool, and when you see the price of the phone later on in the video, you'll understand why that's important. So in a world where 3 cameras become the minimum and phones with triple-digit megapixels come out, how does OnePlus decide to meet the challenge? Easy, with 4 cameras. So currently, in my opinion, the top 3 cameras belong to the Pixel 4, the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and the Samsung S20 Ultra, in that order. And the OnePlus 7 Pro didn't even come close to matching any of those standards, but the 8 does have some potential. I mean, looking at what's on paper, we see that they have 4 cameras. They have a 48 megapixel wide-angle camera with a Sony IMX689 sensor, a 48 megapixel ultra-wide-angle camera with 120 degree field of view, as well as the same IMX sensor, a 3x telephoto lens with 30x digital zoom, and lastly, and actually least important, the color filter camera, which is more so for people who want to play around in editing photos and adjusting backdrops. So I'm curious as to why they opted for another camera instead of just using software to perform this. So on paper, the numbers do seem pretty good. Maybe not as high as Samsung's Ultra, but it's more about how the software interacts with the hardware than just raw numbers. This year, the OnePlus 8 did improve the main camera sensor, as it now has dual native ISO to adjust exposure, which is also found in some professional cameras, and 2x2 OCL, which basically recognizes textures better to provide improved focusing. The interesting thing is that the wide-angle camera has the exact same sensor as the ultra-wide-angle camera, which means that you won't have to sacrifice the main camera quality to get that wider view as you would with other phones. The way that they show this off is by a pretty savage comparison to the iPhone 11 Pro Max with the night picture, and taking the picture at face value, the OnePlus does seem to beat out the iPhone. Regarding the telephoto lens, it's not really that special compared to anything out there, and there's not much to say about the color filter camera. But aside from the pictures, we also use our phones for videos, and especially now where TikTok and Instagram videos are all the craze. OnePlus has introduced enhanced optical image stabilization in combination with electronic image stabilization for their video recording. Now, OIS moves the image sensor in response to physical movement detected in the phone and is more so common in still pictures, whereas EIS, on the other hand, detects the camera shakes but only adjusts for it once the image hits the sensor. So if they got this to work correctly, you'd have the OIS adjusting for the shaking before the image hits the sensor, and then anything that makes it past that would just be adjusted for by the electronic image stabilization, allowing for much more stable video overall. Also, they threw in 3 microphones into the phone to reduce ambient noise, and to me this is pretty interesting to see because I've always had the issue of trying to record a video either in the street or at the end of a hike, but I always get traffic and wind noise. Judging by this video, it does sound clear, but we have no idea how much ambient noise was actually controlled in order to achieve this. Lastly, let's look at another important factor to consider when choosing a phone, and that is why OnePlus. The specs are more or less the same, or at least negligibly different compared to other high-end flagships, so let's go over what OnePlus specifically has to offer. So starting off, they have the Oxygen OS. It's clean, it's simple, and it's as close to stock Android as I've seen, plus it now has a dark mode option, and that's always a win. They now have Amazon Alexa as a phone assistant, and while I do prefer Google Assistant compared to Siri and Bixby, going with Alexa is an interesting option, and one that could make for a hot rivalry down the line. It does make sense though, given that Amazon Alexa is already set up for home use, and much of the same features can be adapted for a smartphone. And lastly, OnePlus listens. Now this is something that's much harder to define, but the improvement in OnePlus has been crazy when you consider that they've only existed in the market for the past 6 years, and they already are competing with the veterans in the market. One way they've been doing this is by listening to customer complaints and finding ways to integrate them in future lineups, much more so than Samsung and Apple have done. But they also do throw in their own features which they believe would be important going forward. And in my opinion, this is exactly how the balance should be. And lastly, you might be wondering what this will all cost you. And while OnePlus was once the cheap flagship killer, those days are gone, because now they officially have a $1,000 phone. And, well, I do think it's justified since they are putting up flagship numbers and the tech they're investing in is getting pretty expensive. All in all, this phone does look to be a great new addition to the OnePlus lineup, and it goes to show that they are trying to constantly improve and stay true to their never settle motto. So if you're in the market for a new flagship, just know that there is a viable alternative to the Samsung S20 or the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and still at a fraction of the cost. That's it for this video, guys. If you liked the video, please comment and subscribe. If you didn't, tell me how I can be better because I'm always willing to improve. Thank you and stay safe.